Thank you, everyone, for joining the World Affairs Council today. We're here to discuss the future of work with our very special guest, Ravi Kumar, President of Infosys. Ravi, welcome, and thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you, Amanda. Thank you, Megan, for this fantastic opportunity to talk to you all.
I'd also like to say another special welcome to everyone joining through our partners, AdvanceCT, CCAT, and Trinity College. Thanks so much for being a part of this conversation and for joining us today. So today's structure will kick off with a conversation with Ravi Kumar and Megan Torrey, CEO of the World Affairs Council of Connecticut. So now let's just get started. I am pleased to turn it over to Megan Torrey, CEO of the World Affairs Council.
Thank you so much, Amanda. And Ravi, welcome to State of the World. We are delighted to have you with us today.
Thank you, Megan. Thank you for this opportunity. I'm so delighted to talk to all of you. And thanks to the Trinity College, folks from Trinity College who have joined as well, because I know Joanne has joined us here in the chat.
Yep.
She's a wonderful partner for us in the state of Connecticut and in our talent strategy across the United States.
We're so delighted to have them as a partner and to be working with you today. And I have to mention that this conversation is so timely as you have just published a piece in the New York Times with Tom Friedman on the future of work. And I know Amanda is going to post a link to that into the chat so everyone can see it. So I just want to, let's jump right in. So Ravi, we are in a time of rapid change. We know, this is a transformational time for everybody, but especially for the future of work. And I think that in so many ways, Infosys is uniquely positioned to meet this moment. I mean, I think you're even expecting higher than projected growth this quarter. So can you set the scene for us? How has COVID-19 impacted and affected the way in which your teams and your systems are working at Infosys?
Megan, thank you so much for this question. Yes, Infosys has been doing pretty well for the last few quarters. There are broadly two reasons, I would say. Large enterprises are doubling down on digital journeys. They're doubling down on digital investments. They are not only switching from consumer value chains where they were for the last decade or so investing, they're starting to apply digital technologies to workplaces. So that's been a big shift. So workplaces have gone virtual, and there's a lot of digital technologies and cloud which is getting invested there. Infosys for the last 1 decade or so has invested on digital infrastructure for our employees and for our operating and business model. So we were geared up for any eventuality where we had to go remote. And I think, ironically, this has been a time when you believe that you want to actually support the frontline workers. We call it the digital frontline workers ourselves. We thought that digital infrastructure we invested has helped us significantly to support mission critical businesses in the US and across the world. So that has helped us to hold our clients and support them. And very interestingly, we've also started to transition new work during this time in a remote way. So very interesting times. Actually, Megan, as we get to the other side of the crisis, we'll be in a hybrid world. I don't believe that we will be in a remote world. And we have the opportunity to define that hybrid world for ourselves. We could pivot to the future or we pivot back to the past. And if we pivot to the future in a remote world, in a remote plus physical world, we will have its own benefits. Ironically, it will lead to some benefits, but let's reset ourselves.
So in so many ways, you're right that the world is going to change, and Infosys has always been sort of creatively thinking. I want to talk a little bit about workforce development and how you view talent, and then how you think we should be viewing talent in the future. So, for example, you've written about the need to focus on skills versus degree and potential over pedigree. Why do workplaces need this approach? Why does Infosys sort of take this approach?
So, Megan, that's a great question, actually. I think it's a confluence of forces. Over the last few years, digital technologies have been on business landscapes and large corporate landscapes. So, digital technologies have a short life of skills. I call being a nuclear scientist, I call it half life of skills. It's kind of shrunk. And therefore, what you need is lifelong learners. Juan, the president of Trinity, is a big evangelist for lifelong learners. And lifelong learning is about learning to learn, learning to unlearn, learning to relearn. And because you're going to switch to a world where skills have a short life, you need to build lifelong learning in K12 schools. And then all your life, you will have to keep learning and unlearning and relearning. The second bit is we are going to move from jobs for life to multiple professions in life. We are going to switch to that era where jobs for life is going to be gone. We're going to have multiple professions in life. The third piece is, in many ways, skills will determine, and therefore skills will determine why the switch to skills is much more apt than being degrees. I don't say degrees are not going to be valid. Degrees are equally important. They're a great way to lay a foundation, but skills will also play a very important role. And that's why I think we have a very bright future, because undergrad education has gone up by 150% in the last 20 years. So you could bridge the digital divide, as I call it, as we get to this era. Fortunately, digital skills are short-lived. However, I also believe that the pandemic by itself is going to accelerate that process. It's going to significantly accelerate that process. You're going to have an exponential curve, and therefore there is an inflection point in degrees and skills. The other big shift, Megan, which is going to happen is machines are going to take over a lot of the work we do. What I mean by machines is AI software, new age digital technology software. As machines take over problem solving, we are going to be in this era of finding new problems, and the human endeavor is going to be about finding new problems. So not only are STEM skills going to be equally important to build those machines or build that AI software, but you're going to find a large pool of talent coming from non-STEM backgrounds like liberal arts, humanities, psychology, anthropology, and they will play a significant role in the future. Educational institutions and large enterprises are going to come together to build consortiums for experiential learning, because you have to be a lifelong learner. So that's a new model which will evolve. Universities and the smart universities and large enterprises are going to come together, and governments can orchestrate that process. So these are a few big switches which are going to happen, which will drive the change of work and education. And actually, I would say education, work, workplaces, and workforce.
Can I ask you for a second to just tell us about how you work with Trinity College and how you're investing in liberal arts education?
Yeah, so Megan, very early on, thanks to the leadership in the Trinity College, we evangelized and we conceptualized something called hiring from liberal arts for digital capabilities. And we have a bunch of work streams, and one of them, which I'm very proud of, is creating data scientists from a liberal arts background. The idea is not just to actually build large pools of data and drive insights technically, but also to actually take those insights and drive the future of what business models look like, what operating models look like. So the Trinity College and Infosys have actually together built a curriculum which helps us to transition that talent. Digital experience, which is one of the reasons why digital native companies do better than large enterprises or compete with large enterprises, is also an art. And that is going to come from very diverse backgrounds. And we are actually building digital experience using non-STEM disciplines like liberal arts.
I want to ask you, as an organization, as World Affairs Councils around the country, we focus a lot on global skills. From your perspective, what is the role of global education in the workplace of the future?
Megan, I want to set a little bit of context on this. When the Industrial Revolution happened many years ago, almost decades ago, there was a linear response to a linear need. The linear need was to industrialize capabilities. And therefore, we had employers who were employing, we had educators who were educating, and we had governments who were bringing all of this together. And there were relationships which were linear: government to education, education to employer, employer to government. That was apt for the times when the change was very linear and we had a linear approach. And therefore, it helped us to get prosperity so far in the world. The world has actually gone to almost $100 trillion. It just fell by 10 trillion because of the pandemic, but we were at the ballpark range of $100 trillion. So there's been good prosperity in the last 50 years or so. However, shared prosperity and inclusive growth was still an issue in the world even today. The rich have become richer and the poor have become poorer across the world. But overall, the world is a better place now than before. Now, the future is going to be nonlinear, and we need an exponential curve because digital technologies are coming at a rapid pace. They have a short life. They've changed very fast. They have an accelerated and an exponential impact on businesses. And you need an exponential response to it. The exponential response to it will come from two things. The lines between government, education, and corporations are going to blur, unlike the Industrial Revolution. And that's a very important piece. That is needed for us. That is needed for us to create an exponential response. So educational institutions will start to partner with large enterprises, and large enterprises will be the learning, will be the experiential learning partners for educational institutions. So you'll not be surprised if you find, say, a data scientist course jointly done between Trinity and Infosys, kind of as an example, or a design course jointly done between Trinity and Infosys. And that is the future of where education is going to learn, education is going to move. The lines between governments and educational institutions and large enterprises are going to blur. The role of governments is going to change significantly. Governments have been focused on the first 20 years of citizens and the last 20 years of citizens, but the change is actually happening in the middle. So governments have to start to reorganize themselves to help citizens in the middle where the change is. And I think that's broadly the reason why I would believe that an exponential response is the need of the hour, and the blurring lines between educators and enterprises and governments will be the future.
So you're part of the World Economic Forum Reskilling Consortium. Can you talk a little bit about that consortium and the global dialogue around reskilling and upskilling, and maybe some of the global differences that exist?
Megan, that's a great question. Actually, jobs. There is this fear, I would say, across the world that machine learning, artificial intelligence will take away jobs. The reality is it's going to take away jobs of the past, but it is going to create jobs of the future. And it's going to create many more jobs of the future. And the Reskilling Consortium is our endeavor to prepare for skills of the future and get institutions together in a partnership so that we could actually prepare organizations to reskill for the future. If we can do so, we will be in a much better spot. We will be in a much better spot in the future. It's very interesting, I say this. We spoke about degrees and skills. The pandemic, ironically, in many ways, is going to create more inclusivity and diversity in workplaces post the pandemic. And I'll tell you why. What's going to happen is there's a debate about inclusivity. We have a dual debate. We have a debate on health crisis and inclusivity. The post-pandemic era is going to be very virtual. It's going to be very hybrid. As work goes away from rich urban settings and it gets dispersed into different parts of the United States, you have the opportunity to hire who you want from any community across the US, we have the opportunity to take the workplace biases out of us, because in a virtual world, you do not know who you are hiring. You only know the capabilities you're hiring. It gives access to people who never had access to urban settings. It gives access to people who wanted to only work part-time. They only wanted to work part-time because they had to take care of somebody at home, or they had to, or because of disabilities. Some of the people do not have access to work in a physical workplace. So all those lines are going to be blurred, and I'm hopeful that the world, enterprises like Infosys, pivot to the future. And as they pivot to the future, we are going to find a more inclusive and diverse workforce. Hopefully, these are all going to be trigger points to drive diversity and inclusivity in workplaces.
That's such an important point. And you actually answered my next question. So I'm going to ask you a little bit about the workplace of the future, right? So what can you describe what some of the most fundamental changes to the traditional workplace that we'll see in the next 5 years, but also the next 25 years?
Megan, I'm going to just summarize this. It's a otherwise I could go on a long answer. This is one of my favorite topics. First of all, workplaces are going to be very hybrid. That's real. As we get to the other side of the crisis, even with a vaccine on board, we are going to actually embrace hybrid workplaces. Already, there are large enterprises in New York City who are already talking about 1 or 2 days of a week kind of a work coming to physical work, which essentially means, states like Connecticut, states adjacent to New York City will benefit significantly, because you could live in Connecticut, come once or twice to work to the city, and then actually go back. So it's a good thing for the world, because it's, you're going to have democratization of work. That is one. The second, with the advent of machines, you're going to see, humans plus machines together in workplaces, which essentially means machines will only amplify human potential, and you're going to see a much diverse cognitive skills needed in workplaces. The Industrial Revolution created problem solvers in workplaces. You're going to see a much diverse workforce. The third piece I would believe very strongly on is we're going to switch from degrees to skills because of the shorter life of skills. The fourth, if I may, you're going to find gig workers in the workplace more than before. Gig workers today are primarily in the ride-sharing economy. They're not in corporate workplaces. You're going to find more gig workers because work has become very modular. Work has actually moved to smaller packets, and it has become very modular. In fact, I keep saying this, jobs are getting disconnected from work. Work and jobs together are going to get disconnected from companies, and companies are going to become platforms for the future. Companies are going to become platforms for the future, where job work is going to get orchestrated by a very diverse workforce, starting from full-time workers to gig workers to machines. That's the kind of complexity we're going to see in a workplace as we go to the future. But it is going to, if we do this right, it is going to bridge the divide we're all worried about today.
So I want to bring in a question from the audience. So if, given your argument, if there's a confluence between government, enterprise, and labor, do you think command economies like China are best positioned to take advantage of this dynamic? Or do you think the US can still really compete?
Well, the US is always one of the most fascinating countries for entrepreneurship, innovation, attracting talent across the world. So I have no doubt in my mind that the US will stay competitive, will continue to stay competitive in a global landscape. I think if we accelerate this process of bringing all these forces together for the future and build skills for the future, we will certainly do it in a much better way. Everything I spoke about today is about democratization. It's about democratization of work, democratization of workplaces, democratization of workforce. So economies which will do well are the ones which actually can promote that diversity, promote that partnership, and promote that orchestration. And the US has always been good at it. good at orchestrating ecosystems. I actually call it a constructive coalition to make this work. And I think if all the constituents come together, this is going to be a game changer.
So I want to go back to your statement about, racial justice and equality. And so how can we ensure that a diversity of people have access to participate in the digital revolution? And that's from our friend, the president of Trinity College.
Yeah, that's a great question. Actually, I would believe that access to new digital jobs, if we take the pivot on skills, we can actually make that difference. One of the things, it's in the public domain, and I can say this. We constituted something called radical reskilling with a consortium called Reskill and Restart. And in the state of Rhode Island, we have actually got people who have lost jobs to apply to this consortium called Reskill and Restart for radical reskilling. And I'll tell you what the difference between radical reskilling and normal reskilling is. My belief is if you're not changing your industry, if you're not changing your work stream, you can go and do an online training and get skilled for the future. It's not a big deal. If I'm a programmer, I have to learn a new language or a new platform, not a big deal. I can go to Coursera, I can go to Udacity, learn something online and then switch my jobs. But if I'm a front desk executive of a hotel, or I'm on the check-in counter at a retail outlet, I want to become a cybersecurity consultant. It's very hard just to do online training and get a job. You might do online training, you might not get a job. So radical reskilling is building a value chain to enable people to move between industries, between work streams. I could actually get a customer service call center representative and make them a data scientist. I could actually bring a front desk executive in a hotel or an airline check-in counter and actually make them a cybersecurity consultant. That is possible if we built a consortium called Reskill Restart. It's on the public domain, so have a look at it. We do evaluation of skills at the start, evaluation of capabilities. It's an AI software-led process, and there's a company called Pymetric which does this. And after we evaluate through AI software, we identify pathways they fit in. What pathways they fit in well. Once we identify pathways, then there are a consortium of partners, including Infosys, on an integrated platform where you could actually choose a pathway which fits the bill. Once you choose the pathway, there is online training, and then there is apprenticeship, experiential learning, apprenticeship with companies like ours. And this apprenticeship is a combination of doing some simulation on a digital platform, but also doing real work with large enterprises. And at the end of that, you will have a marketplace where you have job givers and job seekers coming together for a match. And we experimented this at the state of Rhode Island, and we are very happy that it is making some good progress. And I think this is the best way to do radical reskilling. And if we can do this, we can actually bridge the divide you spoke about. Because the people who are doing low-skill jobs in the United States, they remain on low-skill jobs forever. 50% of the workforce in the United States do not have an undergrad degree. They either have an associate degree or they are high school graduates. So this is our endeavor. This is our endeavor to bridge the divide and give access to those jobs.
So I'm going to combine two questions here, one from Joan and one from Bob. It's about, do you think that we need to upskill our K-12 education? Should we be radically looking at how we do high school differently? What would you say?
Megan, that's a phenomenal question. In fact, one of the roles I do is I chair the Infosys Foundation in the United States, which is focused on K-12 schools. And I think you have to build lifelong learners in K-12 schools. We have to change the way we teach, change the curriculum to create lifelong learners in schools. And to do so, we have to equip the teachers in K12 schools. The Infosys Foundation focuses on K12 schools and teachers in K12 schools. They're under-equipped. And if we can do that well, there are roughly around 3 million teachers in the US, 3 million teachers in K12 schools. If we can do that smartly, that'll be the future. That will set the tone. So K12 schools need a huge uplift. They need a huge uplift, especially public schools. In fact, I would say the pandemic has actually created a bigger divide because there are millions of students who do not have access to internet, who do not have access to devices, and they had access to physical schools. And that divide is actually, it's becoming more and more because they don't have the necessary access. So I would believe that that will be something which we should take it up with a sense of paranoia.
So I know that you are on the board of Advance Connecticut. I know that you're part of the Governor's Workforce Council here in Connecticut. Can you briefly talk about what we're doing here in the state, to develop workforce? And are there any models that can be copied around the country?
Megan, the Workforce Council in the state of Connecticut is a very vibrant one. Garrett Moran actually runs the Workforce Council. For the governor, I actually chaired the IT and BP services committee of that Workforce Council. So very proud to be associated with it. There are a bunch of things Connecticut has to get it right. First, identifying skills of the future. Second, bringing all the education infrastructure together and orchestrating for a common cause. There are so many institutions which are doing their things in small pockets. How do we bring one common infrastructure which can help that community to go forward? Third, making Connecticut attractive enough for businesses to come to Connecticut. So how do we build a workforce which becomes a differentiator for the state of Connecticut so that more businesses get attracted to it? Fourth, how do we make sure that students in the schools of Connecticut, both residents of Connecticut and residents from other states which come to the state of Connecticut, which has some of the most wonderful academic institutions, how do they stay back for jobs in the state of Connecticut? I think these are the 4 or 5 big things we're trying to do. And we're very, very hopeful that we can make Connecticut again a great state.
So we are running out of time, but I want to end with a question from one of our students, because I think it sort of encapsulates everything that you've talked about. So if you had to give a student, who's trying to decide what to do, how to move forward, especially during this hard, difficult time that we're living through a pandemic, what would you say to them? What kind of career advice would you give?
So Megan, this is an extraordinary time. It tests our resilience. It tests our ability to raise hope and stay invested. So my advice would be to continue to raise hope, continue to reinvent and rediscover yourself. This is a great time to reinvent and rediscover ourselves. Prepare ourselves for a future which is going to be very different to the past. So start to challenge your status quo. This is not a temporary phase. As we get to the other side of the crisis, we are going to be permanently and tectonically changed forever. The societal order is going to be very different. Let's start preparing for it. And let's start thinking about how we are going to excel in a better future, in a better world. So I would believe that these are the things for us to reflect on as we prepare ourselves. I have no doubt in my mind that we're going to get a vaccine. It's just a question of time. But we should also be prepared for these kind of eventualities in the future. We're going to be stretched to the boundaries. And when we stretch to the boundaries, institutions and individuals will be tested for character. And these are times when you have to start showing that resilience to be prepared for the future.
Ravi, thank you so much for joining us for State of the World today. This has been a fantastic conversation. I'll throw it back over to Amanda.
Thank you so much, Ravi. Thank you so much for sharing your leadership, your vision with us. And I want to thank everyone for joining us today. It's really been overwhelming, the amount of people who are interested in revisiting this conversation. So we encourage you to subscribe and you'll receive all these notifications. We also encourage you to check out the latest column by Tom Friedman that was mentioned with Ravi Kumar, and that is in the link for that is in the chat as well. Once again, thank you so much to everyone who joined us. This was a phenomenal conversation. And Ravi, thank you so much. We hope everyone out there is staying safe and well, and we look forward to seeing you again soon.
Thank you, Megan. Thank you, Amanda, for this wonderful opportunity.
Thank you so much.